This video is going to be a complete guide for training your legs. We're going to be going over all the different muscle groups within your legs, all the different functions, the best exercises, loads of tips when you're training them, and also how to avoid getting injured when you're training your legs. So before we get started, my name's Charlie. I'm a bodybuilder, BJJ fighter, level 3 personal trainer. I have over 7 years of experience in the fitness industry and have helped many clients gain muscle, build strength and lose weight. If you'll be interested in doing any of that, there'll be links to online coaching in the description, so make sure to check them out. We'll be starting with the anatomy of your legs, and we'll be starting with like the main muscle groups that you need to be aware of, which are your quads, your hamstrings, your calves, your glutes, and your adductors. So the function of each of those muscles, so for your quads, their main function is to straighten your leg, taking it from a bent position into a straight position. One of the muscles within your quads is also involved in your lifting your legs straight up in front of you. And then your hamstrings are like the opposite to your quads. So their main function is to bend your legs, so taking it from a straight position into a bent position. And some of the muscles within your hamstring are also involved in bringing your legs straight back behind you. And then your calves, the main function of them is essentially to take yourself up onto your tiptoes. Some of the muscles within your calves are also very slightly involved in bending your legs. And then moving on to the glutes, the main function of your glutes is to bring your legs apart or bring your legs behind you. And then your adductors are almost like the opposite of your glutes. The main function of them is to bring your legs together. Just before we move on to the next part in the video, I'd just like to make you aware of an email campaign that will be starting soon. What it will be 31 fitness tips across 31 days. But each of these tips is going to massively improve your fitness journey. It's going to help you massively with things like the weight training, cardio, recovery, supplements, eating, mindset, motivation, discipline, goal setting, pretty much everything that you need to know to make this year in fitness your best year so far. It's also 100% free. It'll be linked in the description, so make sure to check that out. So now you know all the different muscles within your legs and what they do. We're going to be going into more detail on like the best exercises for each of those muscle groups within your legs. I'm starting off with the quads. So we mentioned that the main function of your quads is to straighten your leg. So any sort of movement where your leg will be going from a bent position into a straightened position will work your quads well. The most common machine for training your quads directly would be like a leg extension machine. And then other good exercises for your quads would be something like a squat or a leg press or like a lunge, for example, as your knee will be going into that bent position and then you'll be straightening your leg against resistance, and therefore you'll be working your quads during them exercises. And then moving on to the hamstrings. So we mentioned that one of the main functions is to bend your legs, like the opposite of your quads. So any movement where you're taking your leg from a straight position into a bent position against resistance will be effectively working your hamstrings. Any form of like leg curl machine will be effectively training your hamstrings. But we also mentioned that other function is to take your legs from in front of you straight back behind you. So exercises like, for example, squats, leg press, deadlifts, your legs will be going from out in front of you to straight back behind you. However, while that is also happening, your legs will be going from a bent position into a straight position, meaning your hamstrings from one end will be going into a more contracted position, but in the other end they'll be going into a more stretched position, meaning that the net result is that your hamstrings don't really change much in length during those exercises. So they're not the best for actually building up your hamstrings. If you want to focus on doing that other movement, I recommend doing something more like an RDL or like a stiff-legged deadlift. Well, your knee's going to be starting in a more straight position, which will place your hamstrings in more of a stretch. Your knee joint also won't really be moving much throughout the movement, and therefore allowing you to just focus on that other function of your hamstrings. Then moving on to the calves, as we mentioned, their main function is to take your legs going up onto like a tiptoe. Any form of calf raise, whether that be like a standing calf raise, seated calf raise, machine calf raise, will be training your calves effectively. We also mentioned they're very slightly involved in bending your legs. So if you were doing like a leg curl, for example, and you wanted to focus a little bit more on your calves, what you could do is have your ankles in more of a position where your feet are pointing back towards you. So like the opposite of that tiptoe movement. What this will do is it will place a little bit more of a stretch on your calves, meaning they'll be in a better position to contribute to the actual movement. Although things like a leg curl, to be honest, will mainly be using your hamstrings. Next, we'll be covering the best exercises for your glutes. So we mentioned the main function of your glutes is to sort of bring your legs apart or straight back behind you. So that bring your legs back behind you movement will be done in exercises like a glute bridge and a stiff-legged deadlift. However, if you want to do an exercise to mainly focus on your glutes and take your hamstrings out of the movement, you want to try and focus on exercises where your knee is in a more bent position, meaning your hamstring will be in a more contracted position, meaning your hamstrings won't be contributing as much to the movement, and therefore your glutes will be worked the most. For example, choosing like a glute bridge or like a glute drive machine over things like an RDL will work your glutes more, and it's also why you'll feel your glutes more doing those movements. And then bringing your legs apart motion can be done in two ways. It can either be done on like an abduction on a cable. So you'll be standing up straight, leg pretty much straight, bring your leg out to your side. To work your glutes from a slightly different angle, you can also do like a seated abduction machine, where you'll still be bringing your legs apart, but you'll be seated, so it'll work your glutes a little bit differently to if you were doing it standing. And then in terms of the best exercises for training your adductors, I mentioned the main focus on them is to bring your legs to a closer together position. So the main machine that's going to work now is going to be an adductor machine, which will be sitting on the machine and then bring your knees in together to work your adductors. And that way, you can also work your adductors more if you were to do like a squat or deadlift or leg press by having your feet in like a wider position, as that will allow you to work your adductors a little bit more throughout the movements. So now we're going to be going over all the different tips when you're training your legs. The first tip is to do with the foot placement that you use when you're doing a leg press. So if you were to have your feet closer together and low on the pad, it'll be mainly working your quads. The higher you have your legs, it'll work more of like your glutes and hamstrings. And then the wider that you have your legs, the more your adductor muscles will be worked. And the next tip, we're going to be discussing differences between the low bar and the high bar back squat. The high bar back squat is where you have it sort of resting on like your upper traps, whereas the low bar squat, it'll be resting more on your rear delts. And the high bar squat, you'll be in a more upright position and it will work your quads more. In the low bar squat, you'll be in a more of a length forward position and it will slightly work more of like your glutes. Next, we'll be going over the different types of deadlift that you can do and what muscles they'll work. The conventional deadlift will be working a lot of like your glutes, hamstrings, your rectus spinae muscles and like your posterior chain. Whereas if you were to have like that wider stance, it'll work more of like your adductors and your quads and you'll be in a more of an upright position when you're doing the movement. Next tip is when you're training your quads and you're doing leg extensions. So what you can actually do during this is to have a seat more back and lean back when you're doing the exercise, as this will allow you to place a greater stretch on your quad muscles throughout the movement. And then similar sort of idea, when you're doing the leg curl movement, what you can do is slightly lean forward more, as this will allow you to place more of a stretch on your hamstring muscles. So it can be a good variation if you're looking to grow your hamstrings. And a couple other tips when you're training your hamstrings. So in most cases, you want to try and do the seated leg curl over the lying leg curl. Not only will it allow you to your hamstrings to go into more of a stretch position, but it's also a lot more comfortable and a lot easier to get into. So yeah, in most cases, you want to try and select the seated leg curl over the lying leg curl. And then another tip when you're training hamstrings, if you're doing anything like an RDL or stiff-legged deadlift, try if you can to do it while standing on a plate, as this will allow you to go through more of a range of motion. It will allow the bar to come lower relative to the rest of your body, which will place a greater stretch on your hamstrings, which can be beneficial if you're looking to grow them. Next, we'll be going over the tips when you're training your calves. So in most cases, you want to try and do the standing calf raise over the seated calf raise, as it will place your calves in more of a stretched position and has shown to be quite superior for when you're actually training to build up your calves. Also, when you're training calves, try and do them on a machine, or if you're doing them like with a barbell, try and do them standing on a plate, as this will allow you to go through the most range of motion. Instead of being on a flat surface, you want to make sure that your ball of your foot is elevated so that your heel can come down into a lower position, which will maximize the range of motion that you go through throughout the exercise. And then last tip, when you're training calves, your calves have been shown to be the most type 1 dominant muscle group, meaning they may respond better to slightly lower weights for higher reps. So we may want to bear this in mind when you're training. You may want to experiment with slightly higher reps, like maybe 12 to 15, somewhere sort of in that range if it's something that you do want to consider. Next, we're going to have a few tips when you're training your glutes. So when you're doing that seated abduction machine, try and lean forward more, as this will work your glutes a little bit more and will put them in a better position to actually contribute to the movement. Then when you're doing the kickbacks or the abductions, when you're standing and doing them on a cable, try and do them in a way that you're standing further enough away from the cable so that your leg can go across your body, which will place more of a stretch on your glute muscle and will also increase the range of motion in the exercise, both of which will make it more effective. So yeah, try and do it more standing away, maximizing the range of motion. Next, when you're doing any sort of glute bridge movement or anything where you'll be extending your hips, try and actually allow your lower back to round. This will allow you to use your glutes a little bit more and it will allow you to contract them a bit more and then feel them a lot more throughout the movement. So this is one of the only times when you want to be actually allowing your lower back to round. Obviously, you wouldn't want to do it in like a deadlift or squat, but if you're doing it in like a glute bridge movement where you're just extending your hips, it can be a beneficial thing. Also, having like your head down and allowing your whole spine to round will allow you to work your glutes a little bit more. And then last tip, when you are doing any sort of movement like that, try and experiment with having your feet more wider and also more turned out, as this will allow you to work a bit more your glutes and may help you feel them a little bit more as well. And then lastly, just a couple of tips when you're training your adductor muscles. So these are one of the muscles where you'll actually benefit from stretching them as you'll increase your range of motion. So when you're doing that seated adduction machine, the more flexible you are, the more you'll be able to have like your legs going into like a wider position, which will therefore mean that you can place more of a stretch on your adductor muscles. So yeah, try and if you can to make sure you're improving your flexibility and mobility. And then over time, trying to increase how wide your part of your legs go, which will increase your range of motion and the stretch and make the exercise more effective. And then to finish up the video, we're going to be going over a few tips to avoid common injuries when you're training your legs. So first tip, when you're doing any sort of squat movement or leg press movement, you want to try and avoid your knees caving in together, as this can lead to a lot of pain and impingement in your knee. Instead, just make sure your knees are going in the same direction that your feet are pointing. Next tip is to avoid fully straightening your legs when you're doing the leg press. This is especially true if you have things like hypermobility or if you have any sort of knee problems or knee issues. As when you're doing the leg press, especially if you're doing it with a lot of weight and your legs do go into that fully straightened position, it can have the risk of you hyperextending your knee. So yeah, just avoid going into that fully straightened position, stopping about 80 or 90% in the way. Next tip, when you're doing any sort of deadlifts or squat movement, just try and make sure your back's in a more of a neutral position and try and avoid it excessively rounding, especially at your lower back. You can use a belt to help you stabilize your core and help keep your spine in that more of a neutral position as well. And then another basic tip, when you're doing squats, just make sure you have like a safety pin set up so that if you were to fail in a lift, the bar will get stopped at these safety pins and doesn't have the risk of actually falling onto you. Another tip for squats, when you are doing the squats, you want to make sure that the bar is starting over the middle of your foot and then goes straight down and straight up, staying over the middle of your foot the whole time to ensure that your body's in a balanced position throughout the whole exercise. So if you record yourself from the side, the bar should start over the middle of your foot, go down, still over the middle of your foot, and then straight back up, still over the middle of your foot. So you don't want any horizontal movement. You want the bar to come straight down and straight up. And then another tip when you're doing the leg press, you want to try and make sure that your lower back is staying against the seat the whole time and try and avoid it lifting off. So you may want to reduce how far you come down or try experiment with different feet positions to allow you to come down without your lower back lifting up. Also, when you're holding onto the handles, try and think about pulling yourself down into the seat, which will help you to stay more connected to the seat and avoid your lower back lifting off. And then the last tip is to do an Valsalva maneuver. So this can be an effective way to help keep your core more tight and stable when you're doing any sort of like squat or deadlift movement. However, you may want to avoid this if you have high blood pressure, as it will raise your blood pressure quite a bit. Maybe instead do something like a leg press or leg extension while you're just getting into fitness. And only once your blood pressure is lowered, you may want to try experiment with things like squats and the Valsalva maneuver from there. So that's going to conclude the complete guide for leg training. Hope you found this video useful. If you did, make sure to subscribe and like. As I mentioned earlier on in the video, there'll be links in the description to online coaching, everything on my website, as well as that email campaign that we mentioned earlier. So make sure to check all of that out. If you'd like to see like a follow along forearm workout, then click the video here, and then I'll see you in the next video. Bye.